Now let's focus on cardiac arrhythmias, right? So before we were able to determine what an ECG does, electrocardiogram, what it's used for. So now we want to look at cardiac arrhythmia. So when we look at arrhythmias, so the best way to really characterize that is arrhythmia is an abnormal heartbeat, right? So the way I would demonstrate this, if I would have some kind of normal sinus, right? So you remember what sinus was, right? So we had, if I were to redraw this again, here, you have the P, Q, R, S, T complex, where P you have atrial depolarization, you have the QRS where you have ventricular depolarization, and at the T you have the ventricular repolarization. And so the way the electrocardiogram works is not just one sinus rhythm, it's multiple, there's hundreds. And so it's a great way of also detecting cardiac arrhythmias. Right, so if I have a normal sinus here over a time span of about 5 seconds. So if you notice, so if I draw here, really bad at these. So if you have about 5 sinuses, this is normal, right? I'm going to go over specific kinds of pathological conditions of the arrhythmia. So for example, now if we have tachycardia, so when you think about tachycardia, this is abnormally high heart rate, right? So the way it would look on the ECG here you would see an actually overabundance of these amounts of these sinuses, right? So in that 5 second span, when we have only 5 specific sinus rhythms here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So about 9, right? So double the amount over that 5 second, right? This is an example of tachycardia. Bradycardia, however, is the opposite. So bradycardia is abnormally low heartbeat. So you have tachycardia, abnormally high, bradycardia, abnormally low, right? So what would this look like? So we can have our rhythms showing here that over the 5 second span, you have about 5 actual sinus rhythms that are taking place, right? And the final thing is the actual arrhythmias, right? So arrhythmias, when I say arrhythmias, I'm talking about the abnormal heart rate, right? So you'll have the same number of sinus rhythms, but they won't be symmetric. So if you notice from the tachycardia and bradycardia, there is some kind of symmetry, right? Arrhythmias would look more like this. So if I have, for example, 2 of these sinuses very close to each other, then a big gap between the 2, and I have another big gap. So you'll have instances of bradycardia and tachycardia in a combination, right? So you see, even though during the 5 second span that I have here, you can see that there is 5, but the symmetry is lacking, and that's why this is called arrhythmias, right? And then eventually, if arrhythmias aren't treated, this can lead to atrial fibrillation or ventricular fibrillation. So fibrillations basically look like this, right? And they're very, very dangerous, they're very lethal, and they need to be treated as soon as possible, or else death is almost inevitable.